Asa Rubin is an MSNBC legal correspondent who's been watching from inside the courtroom. Andrew Rice, also in the courtroom today. He's a writer at New York Magazine, where he just profiled Trump's defense attorney, Todd Blanche, in a new cover story, and they join me now. Great to have you both here. Let me just start top-line impressions from the day today, Lisa.
I think my top line impression is that David Pecker has a whole lot to say. One of the things that he said at the very beginning was he was asked how often he communicated with Trump. And he said after Trump became a candidate, their conversations increased, not decreased. You would expect a presidential candidate would get so busy that they wouldn't really have time for their old friend David Pecker. And yet they still found time to meet once a month, talked on the phone roughly once a week, and sometimes more. We heard about two of those conversations today, bookended sort of the beginning and the end of the testimony, that August 2015 meeting that you talked about, and that phone call during 2016 about Karen McDougal having been vetted and what Trump wanted to know about that conversation. I have to assume there are a lot more conversations that David Pecker had directly with Donald Trump, and that the prosecution is going to elicit testimony about them in the ensuing days.
Andrew, what did you think?
I mean, I thought the most relevant thing to watch was actually sort of the ongoing dichotomy between what's going on inside the courtroom and what's happening outside the courtroom. And I think that it came into relief, really, when at the beginning of the day, when there was a hearing about whether Donald Trump was going to be held in contempt for some of the things that he had said on Truth Social about witnesses, even about a juror in the case. And Todd Blanche, the guy that I profiled in the story, got up and said, you know, that our client has a right to talk about the two systems of justice that are being shown here in this courtroom. And I think this is something that we're going to see a lot, which is basically Donald Trump is not, if he can win an acquittal or if he can win a mistrial, that's great for him, but he's running against the system.
Well, okay, let's follow up on that, because Blanche also at one point says to Mershon, and we're going to talk about this in a second in greater detail, but he says, like, he's doing his best or something, or like, we're trying our best, and that's when Mershon says, like, you're losing credibility. Like, come on, buddy. What is Blanche's angle here? Like, if it is the case that your understanding of Trump's approach to this is not primarily legal, that it's primarily about this sort of making this broader case in the court of public opinion, is Blanche on board with that strategy?
Well, I think that Blanche is ultimately trying to, and they've made it very clear, they're hoping to find a juror, one juror, really, who will hold out and won't vote to convict Donald Trump. And they're hoping for a mistrial. And if there is a mistrial, of course, Donald Trump will go out on the courthouse steps and say, I've been completely exonerated, even here in New York. And so that's their strategy. Ultimately, the back and forth with the judge, which is happening outside of the presence of the jury, has not bled into the trial too much. But it's going to be an interesting dynamic to watch.
Yeah. In terms of this, you know, the Pecker testimony and the notion of like a mistrial, I mean, one of the things that just going back to the transcripts is just sort of striking me again. And maybe this is such an obvious point, but just indulge me for a second. Is like, you know, sometimes you'll have like in a classic sort of mystery courtroom drama, there's a question of like, was it that person driving the car? Did this actually happen? In this case, it's like, it's clear as day all this stuff happened. It's clear as day. Like, is there any real doubt that David Pecker met with Michael Cohen and Donald Trump, that they set up the catch and kill? I mean, I guess you could think that Pecker's lying and that Michael Cohen's lying and that all the... But the basics of the story that's being presented here just seem to me like pretty much bedrock solid.
Yeah, but let me push back on that a little bit. I think that one of the things that the prosecution has to establish, and was surprising to many people in the courtroom, is the extent of Donald Trump's own involvement here, which of course...
As the bar here.
Yes, which is necessary not only contextually, but to prove the crime. The other thing is we all know about what I'll call the antecedent story, the setup of the hush money payments. The thing that the prosecutors have to really prove, though, to show falsification of business records as a felony, is that there was a cover-up with the intent to commit or conceal a crime. And tying Donald Trump expressly to that, I think, is something that none of us have really seen their evidence about yet. And we're all looking for it.
Totally. But I guess my point is that on this part of it, right, which is not the criminal part, it's just like, did this arrangement happen? It just seems clear that it did happen. I mean, again, I'm not in the jury, but just from the reporting we have, from the testimony, and I also wonder, also because I can't quite get it from the transcript. From the transcript, Pecker seems pretty comfortable and forthcoming as a witness. How would you describe him?
I thought that it was, maybe I'm naive, but I thought it was pretty shocking to hear him talk with such total frankness.
Yes, exactly. That's how it comes off.
Nature of the relationship that he had with Donald Trump, and he actually quite candidly said on the stand that this was not normal. This wasn't even by the standards of the National Enquirer. These transactions were not normal. They had a very special relationship with Donald Trump that they had forged, and they wanted to see Donald Trump elected president, and they were acting sort of as an adjunct arm of the campaign.
And that, I mean, this has nothing to do with the criminal trial per se, but just as disclosures go. The part about the seeding negative stories, like he would just send us stuff and that is shocking and would be in any other media enterprise an unbelievable scandal, and also gives you a little sense of how Donald Trump projects his view of the media. Like his view of the media being like they all function like that because that's what the Enquirer did for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that sort of was lost until today is what is David Pecker getting out of this? And in complimenting and praising Donald Trump, that's what made his testimony so damning. He said he was the top celebrity among Enquirer readers, that he was knowledgeable about his business, that he was detail-oriented, micromanagerial. All the things that he said about Donald Trump that were complimentary are eventually going to be his doom as Pecker tells his story.
And also there's a little bit of a time machine thing about going back to The Apprentice as a hit show, and I'm trying to sell magazines, man, and this guy's got a big show and he moves product. So we need to be close to him. Lisa Rubin and Andrew Rice. That was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.